Hello everyone, thanks so much for joining me today. This is Dylan from the Trinidad Gardener channel, and today I'm going to be showing you all how you can grow your own tomatoes at home in containers 100% organic. It will be 7 very simple steps. Let's get to it. This is a 5-gallon container that was repurposed, recycled, and we can use this for our tomatoes. The size itself is not super important because you can go as low as a 1-gallon container like I have here. Now I will say if you get a 5-gallon such as this big one here, you'll have a lot more room for the tomatoes to be free and to grow and eventually be a healthier plant. But if you don't have one this size, a size this small, I would say this is the actual minimum, but it can work. You're going to want to make sure that you put drainage holes at the bottom. This is key. You don't want water to go into your plant when you water and then there's nowhere for the water to go, because what will happen is the water is going to build up and eventually it's going to rot the roots of your tomatoes. Alright, so containers, very important. Now the basis for any good soil is going to be one that is well draining, full of organic matter, and can retain enough moisture. Here I have some topsoil, right? This topsoil was bought $25 for a very small bag. Next I have some leaf compost, right? This is going to be adding in my organic matter. I created this compost myself. It's going to add also a lot of beneficial bacteria into my mix. And the last thing that I have is what we call in Trinidad Pro Mix, even though technically Pro Mix is just a brand that sells a growing mix that contains peat moss, perlite, vermiculite, and limestone. It's really good for your plants. Later on I'll do videos explaining what those things do specifically. Now it's time to mix everything together. I have my shovel here. It's normally, really useful, but the good thing about the garden is you can get your hands nice and dirty, and it's really good to connect with nature, right? So I'm just going to mix these different types of soil together. Okay, so I'm going to get some of the compost into the topsoil, right? Get a nice handful of the Pro Mix into that, right? The idea is that you're going to be doing this only one time, right? Afterwards, you really don't want to disturb the soil. You're trying to replicate a natural garden environment inside of a container. All right, so that's why I'm putting in the organic matter, because if you think naturally of a rainforest floor, leaves are going to naturally fall to the ground, they're going to rot, decompose, and that creates compost. And from those leaves, plants will naturally grow up. Now, of course, there are so many potting mixes that are already done for you that you can buy. My issue is that they're very expensive, and I don't think that gardening has to be necessarily expensive for you to be successful. So altogether, everything here cost me under $40, because the Pro Mix alone, that entire bag is $20, and I only use one handful from it, so that's probably what, $5 or less worth of it. The topsoil cost me $25, so that's $30. It's really not an expensive mix, and this is going to work as well as any potting mix that you have out there. I'm just going to put this into my bucket now. Remember guys, on this channel we are all about being efficient but affordable. I don't want to be shooting some amazing ideas out there and then you look at it and say, well, that's good, but I need to spend probably $1,000 just to get a few pounds of tomatoes. It's not going to be worth it. It's not going to be worth your time. It's going to be me wasting my time. That's what we're all about here, making it easy, affordable, efficient, and organic. Now, you've heard me talk about soil that was moisture retaining but also loose enough and well draining. This is what that would look like. Okay, so you see I squeeze it together now. Okay, it compacts but also it can crumble apart. That's what we're looking for in a good soil mix. Okay, so I'm going to be digging a nice deep hole for my seedling. Right, I got this at my local greenhouse. I paid $1 for it. Now you shouldn't be paying more than $1 to maybe $2 at max for your tomato seedling. Okay, any greenhouse, any agro shop should have them. If you have no clue where to go, then you can just send me a message and I will be happy to direct you to a good seedling agro shop in your area. Now, something I want you to notice is that this is where the roots are. This is where the majority of the roots that came up from the seed are, right? But a tomato is a vine, okay? So if you look really closely when the camera focuses, you can see tiny white fibers almost coming from the stem, okay? Those fibers, believe it or not, are actually roots that are just dormant at the moment. As soon as those roots touch soil and they get moisture from that soil, they're going to start rooting and they're going to actually begin springing even bigger roots. All right, so you're going to have a lot more root system, a more robust, stronger root system if you plant a bit of that stem directly into the soil. So you're not planting up until alone where you see the plug. We're going to be taking off these lower leaves and we're going to be planting all of that stem into the soil up until a certain point, and that will give us a lot more roots that will support an even bigger, healthier, more robust plant that will produce more fruit and be more resistant to disease. Now you might be wondering, why start from a seedling and not from a seed? The thing is that unless you have something to prove, it's going to put you back a month and even more to start from a seed. So I prefer seedlings. Even big farmers use seedlings, and unless you really have something to prove, you should just start from seedlings. It'll be a lot easier for you, especially as a beginner. Now again, putting the root system from the plug as well as a generous bit of the stem into this container. I sort of misaveraged the amount of soil, so the soil is not quite up to the top of the container, but later on I'm going to top it up and I'm going to actually bring the soil straight up to the rim of that bucket. That way I'm going to be covering probably about half an inch more of the stem and getting that much more roots. Now, a super important step is to water in, giving your tomato seedling a very good, complete drink of water as soon as you plant it in. This is going to help compact the soil, get the tomatoes housed into that growing medium, and getting the tomatoes ultimately starting to grow with immediate moisture. Now, we're just going to take a glance at the bottom of the bucket. I want you to see what's going on there. You see that water coming out at the bottom? That's because our drainage holes are working. Remember, we don't want the water to go to the bottom of the plant and settle there and become stagnant. We want the water to go through, moisten the soil, and leave.
So next up is fertilization. Now fertilization doesn't necessarily have to be chemicals in your plants, but you are trying to replicate what would have happened in nature instead of a small container like this. So it's not the most natural thing to begin with. So you want to make sure that your soil has a good level of NPK, which you may have heard of before. NPK simply stands for nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. The nitrogen is what is going to allow that really good green leafy growth and allow your plant to come up. Okay, your phosphorus is going to help with that root development and eventually get your plant to flower and start producing those nice blooms that are going to turn into your lovely tomatoes. And then potassium is going to be for that overall growth. And remember that an overall healthy plant is what you're going for. Besides your macronutrients, your nitrogen, phosphorus, and your potassium, your tomato plant is also a heavy feeder of things like calcium, which will help prevent blossom inrot. And that's generally because of either a lack of calcium or the lack of ability of a plant to take up calcium. Now, something that really helps with a plant being able to take up the calcium is making sure that you have magnesium in your soil. That's where the old folks would generally say add some Epsom salt into your soil, because Epsom salt is more or less pure magnesium that you can put directly into your soil. Now, all of these things are going to promote a very strong, healthy plant that will be eventually fruiting and making really nice tomatoes. Now for watering, your tomato plant likes really nice, even, moist soil. Now if you have the right type of soil like I have shown you, you're not going to need to water your plant every day. That's really going to be too much for your plant. What I would advise, even under the hot conditions that we have in Trinidad, is that you water your plants maybe once or twice a week in containers. The reason that's actually quite frequent, and it's that containers tend to dry really, really quickly. But if you put in a good soil that can retain that water while allowing it to drain out eventually, you don't want it to become too retained, then you're going to have no problem watering your plants maybe once or twice a week, specifically for tomatoes. And remember, water is also going to help with the taking up nutrients from the soil.
Now you need to stake your tomatoes. If you remember in step 3, I said a tomato is more or less a vine. That means it needs to be supported by something. It can grow on its own probably up until 2.5 to 3 feet. After that, it risks falling over. Okay, so support your tomatoes. In this case here, I'm using a PVC pipe I had laying around. You can use steel rods, pieces of wood if you have. Be creative. Don't go spend any money on furrings or furring strips, but this can work. Now, the consumer needs in Trinidad more or less require tomatoes that are determinate varieties, so they grow up until 4 feet around. That's why most of these are 4 feet poles. But this stake here, if you look at it, it's a lot longer. Later on, I'm going to be showing you all some varieties that require longer staking simply because they keep growing and growing and growing. These are called indeterminate type tomatoes. These would not be so good in tomato choker.
And the very last point, which is probably the most important point, is sunlight. Your tomato plant needs sunlight for energy, and a tomato plant should get at least very minimum 7 hours of direct sunlight. So that doesn't mean the sunlight that you get inside of your house, inside of a room where you can just see light. It's direct sunlight that is on me right now. This is an example of direct sunlight. So you want to find an area of your wherever you live where the sun is going to be hitting directly. If it's a situation where you have a lot of shade, but you can find certain spots where the sun maybe hits 4 hours over here, 4 hours over there, your plant is in containers. So you can put the plant over there in the morning time, get your 4 hours, and then maybe get 3 to 4 hours again at another point where you get that shade. It's very important. You can think of the sunlight almost like the electricity that runs a device. If you have the best phone or the best computer, if you don't have the electricity, it's not going to be able to do anything for you. The sunlight is the energy. It's photosynthesis that allows us to have a big plant and eventually have fruit. So please don't neglect sunlight, not partial sunlight, not in the shade, and you think it's just really bright, so that means it's getting sunlight. Direct, unhindered sunlight from the sun, obviously, and that will help your plant to grow big and strong and do really well for you. And that's pretty much it, guys. 7 super simple steps that you all can do. If you know someone who will really benefit from this information, share the video with them. Let them know that they too can have tomatoes at home, 100% organic, in containers. This has been Dylan with the Trading Gardener channel, reminding you to get up and get growing. See you all in the next one. Take care.